Welcome back to Decode The Matrix podcast, where the veil gets lifted and the truth speaks louder than protocol. Tonight's episode is deeply personal because this time we're not just decoding deception, we're telling my son's story. Marlon Maurice Gardner, my baby. He was misdiagnosed with leukemia, but what he really had was something entirely different. And the system didn't just get it wrong. They ignored the signs and buried the truth. Tonight's episode is going to challenge everything that you thought you knew about modern medicine, especially cancer diagnosis. We're not here to scare you. We're here to set the record straight because sometimes what they call leukemia is not leukemia. And that's exactly why we brought in a fearless voice. She's not your average doctor. She's the one they try to silence. Please welcome Dr. Truth. Thank you, Queens. Let's get right into it. See, most people don't realize that leukemia is diagnosed based on blood smear patterns, low blood counts, or abnormal cell morphology. But here's the problem. So are a lot of other conditions. Wait, so you're saying that people are being diagnosed with leukemia when it's not even leukemia? Exactly. Let me break it down. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many leukemia diagnoses are made without ruling out what's called a differential diagnosis. That means doctors are supposed to explore all possible causes before concluding that a patient has cancer. But that rarely happens. There are two major conditions that can mimic a leukemia. One, thalassemia, and the other, vitamin B12 deficiency. Thalassemia is a genetic blood disorder. It causes low hemoglobin, fatigue, and even changes in the bone marrow. On lab results, this can look like leukemia, especially if the provider isn't trained to identify genetic markers. Thalassemia presents with anemia, enlarged spleen, bone marrow abnormalities, all things that could be misread as signs of leukemia. Now, this one is painful to talk about because it's treatable. A deficiency in vitamin B12 can lead to megaloblastic anemia, fatigue, neuropathy, and even pancypeemia when all blood counts are low. These symptoms mimic leukemia so closely that doctors often jump straight to chemo without checking B12 levels. Bria, when Marlon first started showing symptoms, what were they? He was tired. He had low counts, no fevers, no bone pain, no night sweats. They saw low counts and rushed us into the chemo room. Classic mistake. Those symptoms could be from megaloblastic anemia, vitamin B12 deficiency, and even thalassemia. And in Marlon's case, he had all three. His body was crying for help, and they called it cancer. They told us he was dying unless he got chemo. Then came the radiation, then came the transplant. He was just a boy, and we trusted them. But we was never given the full truth. They never used the words differential diagnosis, not once. Hold on. So chemo for B12 deficiency? Yep, happens more than you think. And once that diagnosis is written, it follows the patient like a ghost, even if it's wrong. And the doctors, they never go back and correct it. Rarely, because then comes the liability. Dr. Truth, while we're talking about misdiagnosis and the failure of differential diagnosis, I think it's time to go deeper. If leukemia is often misidentified, especially in melanated children with vitamin B12 deficiency and thalassemia, or B12 deficiency, then why is chemotherapy the immediate default? Exactly. No one ever stops to ask, where did chemo come from? Or who really benefits when it's used on children, whether they need it or not? Let's talk about it. Chemotherapy's origin traces back to mustard gas. Yes, a chemical used in World War I. When soldiers were exposed, doctors noticed that it destroyed rapidly dividing cells, including white blood cells. That discovery became the foundation of chemo drugs. So it started with warfare, and now it's being used on our babies. Yes, Bria. A weapon of war was rebranded as a treatment. But here's the real kicker. They never removed the war. They just moved it inside the body. And because cancer care is a billion-dollar industry, there's no financial incentive to slow down or question these protocols. That explains why they push chemo like candy. They don't even wait. The minute the word leukemia is mentioned, even without full testing, they start prepping chemo bags. There's no pause, no second opinion, just a conveyor belt. And when the patient is melanated or from a low-income family, that conveyor belt gets faster. These hospitals are incentivized through federal reimbursement, clinical trials, and nonprofit research funding to push chemotherapy, even when the diagnosis is wrong. That was my son, Marlon. They told us he had leukemia. They ignored the signs, macrocytes, megablastic anemia, genetic red flags, everything. But they pushed chemo anyways. They never gave us the truth, just fear, because fear is profitable. I'm so sorry, Bria. And unfortunately, your story isn't isolated. It's systemic. Misdiagnosis and a profit-first model have turned hospitals into war zones, disguised as healing centers. So the same chemical that was banned in warfare is still being used in medical warfare. Exactly. And if a child suffers or dies, it's called complications. But they never call it what it really is. A system that profits off poisoning the misdiagnosed. That's why we're decoding the matrix. Because if we don't, our silence becomes their weapon. Bria, I know it's hard, but if you're ready, I think it's time you introduce to the world the cure that kills, exposing the truth behind the medicine. Yes, you're right, Renee. It's time.
All right, y'all, we need to pause real quick and talk about something that's not just important, it's urgent. A brand new book just dropped and it's called The Cure That Kills. And when I tell you this book is going to shake the system, I mean, it's calling out everything, big pharma, the hospitals, the experiments, the cover-ups, all of it.
Marlon was 6 years old when they diagnosed him with leukemia. They just slapped a label on him and handed us fear wrapped in a white coat. That's exactly what happens. They use urgency to override informed consent. Start chemo today or he could die, they say. But what they don't say, if he doesn't have leukemia, chemo could be the thing that kills him. And once chemo starts, it's like there's no going back. It's a protocol pipeline. Chemo, radiation, transplant. And even when it doesn't work, they say, let's try more. Let me be clear. When a child is misdiagnosed and then given chemotherapy, what's being practiced is not medicine. It's medical violence. And when the hospital realizes the truth, but covers it up to protect its liability, that's not a mistake. That's fraudulent concealment. And that's why I wrote The Cure That Kills, because no mother should have to find out years later, after her child's death, that the diagnosis was wrong, that the chemo was unnecessary, that the truth was buried in the records. This book is not just Marlon's story. It's a warning, a wake-up call for every family blindly trusting a system that profits off pain. It's powerful, it's painful, and it's proof. The Cure That Kills breaks down everything. They hope that no one would uncover. And if you're watching this and think, this can never be my child, you're exactly who needs to read this. Because the system isn't broken. It's designed this way. My son's voice was silenced. But through this book, through this podcast, through this truth, he finally speaks.
If you ever question the medical system, if you've lost someone and didn't get answers, or if you just want to understand how deep the rabbit hole goes, you need to read The Cure That Kills, exposing the truth behind the medicine.
I'm coming in hot.